a conversation a little bit about this sweet game that Byron has created using Claude Code. And he put together a really cool game that he's going to kind of discuss a little bit about what he did, how he did it, and why he did it, and the tools that he used to get there. So let's start with you, Byron.
We've been using Claude Code now ever since it really came out, and it's progressively gotten better. And, back the end of last year, around, I think, October, I decided to, I was reading about, autonomous agents using Claude Code in an autonomous way where you just kind of launch it and let it burn through stuff. And I wanted to give it a try, and I wanted to do it on something that was kind of significant and kind of hard to do, right? I wanted to kind of find the edges of Claude. And so one thing I always wanted to do was, port a video game. I thought, that's kind of a cool idea. And so there's a video game I played in the mid 90s. Yes, I'm old. And it's called Command and Conquer. And they open sourced the game engine itself not too long ago. Well, several years ago. And so I decided that that'd be perfect to try to do the Ralph Wiggum Loop on it. That was the new kind of way of using Claude Code in sort of an autonomous way. I thought, let me give that a try and let me see how far we can push Claude Code and what kind of results would we get. And so that was the decision, was to pick that game and port it to Mac OS from Windows, because it was open sourced, but it was made for Windows.
Yeah. And I think it's important to note here that you're not a game builder at all. I mean, have experience, obviously,
No,
in software
I'm I've
development.
I've definitely been writing software for right at 30 years, but never done any game development outside of just a silly, Pong game or something, or asteroids. Nothing as hard as Command and Conquer.
Yeah, so you took the game, so let's kind of focus a little bit on that. So the idea was to find the edges of Claude Code with a game that you're kind of familiar just playing with it, but not like the back end and the mechanics of it, and then take it, port it into
Correct.
Claude, and then say, okay, well now I want it to work on my Mac, right? So when you started working on it, what were some of your takeaways? What did you learn when you started working it with the Ralph Wiggum Loop and working with Claude and talking to it and kind of moving through those steps?
Yeah. The first thing I wanted to do was let me see if the hype is true. I think I do what a lot of developers do, is the first thing is just, I'm just going to dive right in and just basically say, hey, Claude, let's port this game, make no mistakes, kind of thing. So I did a little more than that. I basically, knew the concept of Ralph Wiggum is you create a bunch of tasks. So you've got to put some forethought into it. You have to think about, like, well, what is it that we need to do? And we got to break those down into tasks. And then you sort of turn the Ralph Wiggum loop loose on it. And each task has sort of an expected, acceptance criteria. It also has what's called an escape hatch kind of thing. Like if errors start happening, and it can kind of break out of the loop. And then you can also set a fixed iteration limit on it. So if something really goes weird, you don't want it to just sit there and just spin and spin and burn up all your tokens in Anthropic. So I knew that was kind of the pattern, and that's what we had to do. But I was like, fine. So first I sat down with Claude Code, and I pulled down the open source game engine for Command and Conquer Red Alert. And I basically had a conversation with Claude Code, and I said, this is what I want to do. I want to port this, to Mac OS from Windows. And then I didn't really go much farther than that. I said, let's put a plan together. And so it put a plan together. Then I said, okay, now I gave it the URL out to Anthropic's Ralph Wiggum plugin. And I said, okay, go out here, look at how the tasks should be designed, and create all the tasks. And it went, cool, all right. And it did that. And it created all these tasks. And I just did what everyone was doing at the time. And I was like, well, I'm going to just fire it off and burn through all these tasks. And so it ran, I forgot how many hours it ran total. But yeah, it burned all the way through them, and it was kind of fun watching it work because it would also had it, create unit tests and things, and so it would burn through, and it would every once in a while like do tests, and I would see like screens come up and like weird sounds would happen, which was kind of interesting because I could tell it was actually doing something. And then it got to the end, and I'm like, okay, cool. I can like run this thing. So I'm like talking to Claude, and I said, let's, I'm gonna run it and test it. I was like, cool, do it. Yeah, I was ready to rock and roll. First thing, it crashed. Right, sad. The first thing everyone has to get through their minds is like, it's not ready to rock and roll right out of the box. Like you've got to definitely still check it and validate it. And so it started crashing, and I started kind of working through the bugs with Claude Code. Again, I'm not a gamer or a game developer, definitely a gamer. I started working through the errors. I kind of knew what was going on. And then I kind of noticed, well, it made a lot of assumptions, right? I needed to give it more detail is what I realized. It was actually doing more than just removing the Windows parts. It was actually rewriting all of the C++ logic of the game and making it into Rust. So that's the other detail I forgot is I was having it port to the Rust programming language. So it started like, you know, porting all of that, and that's not what I wanted to do. Again, it started making kind of some assumptions. Again, I didn't really pay a whole lot of attention to the plan that it originally generated. So I kind of was like, well, I guess I could keep going here and going with this, or I can just punt. And so that's what I did. I said, I'm going to punt and redo this now, knowing that I need to be way, way, way more specific in the task. And so I kind of just threw all that away, rechecked out the repo. And the approach I took the second time was being very, very specific. First, I had Claude spend time going over the code, identifying the Windows components of the system. It went through, it identified all the different areas of the system that were Windows dependent. And I said, okay, for each of those, let's create a plan to port those to Mac OS. And so it went through, created a plan for all of those areas. Then I had it go through each of those plans and create Ralph Wiggum task. Basically, all the different layers of the game that were dependent on Windows, it created plans, and then from those plans, I created tasks. And then I took a little bit of time to have, Claude even kind of review the tasks to make sure that they had enough context in them, and things like that. And then instead of just burning through them all, I had it do each kind of layer one by one, and I just, watched it. And it did it in a cool way. It kind of started first foundational layer, like, file system access, windowing, like creating the windowing systems and handling of the mouse and things like that. So it kind of built it like a layer cake, one layer at a time. After each layer, the other thing that I learned, kind of thought, well, it made a lot of assumptions in the last thing, and it also did a lot of stuff like, this is placeholder comments. We're not implementing this code here. I'm waiting till this next piece is done. And so I was keeping track of that too. So I was having Claude kind of look over its own work, and I had a file that was keeping track of all of the areas that we had to circle back to.
Yeah. Did you have to do that? Did you have to circle back, or did Claude circle back?
Well, Claude.
As one of their we had.
And it actually wasn't that bad.
Stuff.
Yeah, it actually wasn't too bad. So after going through all the layers like that, and again, I had it focused specifically on just removing the Windows stuff and moving, and using Mac OS, but then all of those parts were made into Rust, but it left all of the existing C++ logic, right? Mm-hmm. And so I had to do all that. When it got to the end, I went to run it, and it crashed, but sad. Not as bad. It was sad. But it wasn't as bad this time. Kind of after like the third bug fix, all of a sudden the window came up, stuff was working. I had some weirdness with the mouse. I had a lot of weirdness with the sound. And, but Claude, working with Claude Code, I was able to work through all those things pretty quickly. And surprisingly, it worked out great. So my point here is for everybody to understand is, you're not just going to be able to just like create a bunch of tasks and, half-ass doing it, and then just point Claude Code using a Ralph Wiggum loop and just burn through them all, and out the other side comes perfect code. That is not the case. But I will say this: if you spend a lot of time putting a lot of like engineering thought in what you're trying to accomplish and guiding Claude to generate the task and making sure that's providing enough context in each task, it absolutely gets you a huge way there, at least 80% of the way there. And then obviously the validation step at the end of like, going through all the bugs, making sure that all the game menus work and things like that. Now, there were a few areas of the game that I had Claude specifically not do yet, and because I need time to think about it, I just didn't have time to do it. And that was around the networking, the multiplayer stuff. It was actually, this game is so old, it was using like Novell networking, IPX protocol, and crap like that. So I was like, yeah, we'll get to that later. Let's just get the game working. I mean, I did maybe, I don't know, 10 iterations of bug fixes to get it to actually work. So
yeah, and this took you overall about 4 days to do for the most part. And I know that we're going to provide the code for the game below in the conversation for everybody to click on it and look at it, but let's take a look at what the game looks like, just maybe a little.
Just launch it.
Spin it up. Just spin it up, because I want to play. I want to see it.
Sure.
You got to prove it. We can talk about it, right? We talk about all the work that was done with Claude, but seeing it is a totally different thing.
Yep. You see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so this is the IDE that I was using. So again, all of this will be checked in. Anyone can come check it out. It's still, I've updated the README a little bit to talk about, the different parts and pieces. I also left the Claude MD in there too, to just kind of so people can check it out. But you want to see the game. So here's the build. Rōnin Red Alert is what I called it. I even changed the app icon, which, anyone can see that. It's very loud when it launches. But as you can see, the original game was like super small. It was like 640 by 480. I actually updated it to where it is, it's using like the Mac OS upscaling, graphics and things like that. And you can hear the sound playing, but you can start the game, pick your level, and it has all the cutscenes. They all play.
Reinforcements have arrived.
And
yes, sir. Acknowledged. Waiting for affirmative. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Okay, I think we get it. Confirmed. I can confirm it now that I've seen it with my own eyes and heard it with my ears.
That's right.
Oh, that's so great. I love it.
Yeah, it was fun doing it. For Rōnin, it definitely has, we kind of see where things are going. Right after we did the Ralph Wiggum stuff, Anthropic updated Claude Code to where it actually sort of does this internally now. When it does plan mode, it will create tasks. And they actually have kind of agent swarm concept now where, it'll issue that, you'll have a bunch of Claude agents actually working on it too. So they've kind of taken that and built it in. But where I was going is we see that I think by the end of the year, you could definitely, as long as you spend enough time to, decompose a product requirement document, into features, then into tasks, and you really spend the time to put enough context of what needs to be built into those tasks, you could have Claude Code spin through those, and then the next day or whatever, or the next hour, the developer could just do what I did, and that's to validate, does it work? Let me work through the bugs and things like that. And it will only get better over time, right? But I do think the key that we've learned is, yes, developers are going to be managing agents in the future, but they're still needed to know what to build, right? That's the key. And when people say that, I always say it's sort of nuanced, right? It's at the macro level, it's what do we build? But then at the code level, the micro level, an engineer still needs to like create the right kind of task and give enough context of what to build at the level of, the system level, the layers, oh, it's got a scale, then we need to do a different type of design. So those kind of things is very important. But the actual coding will go fast by watching all the agents. But then on the other side of that, it's the validation, it's the bench testing of the software and things like that.
Yeah, you're still going to have an experienced developer to know what they're looking at and know how to look at the code and
for now.
Fix the bugs.
For now.
Yeah, all right, awesome. I love it. I think it's so cool that you were able to do that. And I know that internally at Rōnin, everybody's kind of getting on that as well and building games and building other things and seeing what Claude Code can do in different facets and building things as well. So I think it's really awesome that people who aren't really coders like myself and, other entities can write code. All right, cool. Well, I think that pretty much sums up everything that, you worked on for the game and, what we're doing with Rōnin. Do you have any final thoughts as to, what you think it's going to turn into again, or like what are we going to do any more in Rōnin? Are we working on using that for client work at all?
There, we definitely, there's some internal work that we're doing to there's definitely a compression of the SDLC that's occurring. So we're kind of trying to get out ahead of that and using the power of Claude Code, which as of today, Claude Code is probably our favorite coding agent. But trying to get out in front of the compression of the SDLC and making it to where everyone, not just the developers, can leverage AI at all ends, at the gathering of requirements all the way to QAing, leveraging AI to make all that go faster. Because if you don't, the code's going to be generated really fast, and there's going to be these bottlenecks everywhere. So we're trying to get out ahead of that and be able to move at the speed of AI. So we got some stuff we're working on internally, which we may show.
We may.